the communities in place scrutiny on the 3rd of February, I believe it is. I've changed the agenda around a little bit for reasons of practicality, basically. So I shall just get my paper here. And the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Chair, I'm not sure if I can see everybody, but Alan Heppel and Liz Dunn are in a meeting. I'm not sure
they're here now. I can see them.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. So the next thing is disclosure of members' interests.
Sorry, Chair, could we just run through the attendance and I can confirm apologies?
Do you want to do that or do you want me to do it?
Whichever you want to do, Councillor Reid, whichever you prefer.
First of all, Councillor Armstrong, we have apologies from her, I believe.
That's correct.
Councillor Carty.
Here, I'm here.
Councillor Dunbar.
Yeah, Chair.
Councillor Dunn.
Present.
Councillor Gallagher.
Present.
Councillor Gibson.
Present.
Councillor Heppel.
Present.
Councillor Horncastle. He was here. Oh, there he is. And Councillor Stow.
Yeah.
There we are. Everybody's here apart from Councillor Armstrong. Okay, so the next thing then is, I'll repeat the disclosure of members' interests, and those are just things that you haven't already declared, so that's fine. None of them. So the next thing is the forward plan of cabinet decisions. Does Sean want to say something about this, or we're just content to move on?
Yeah, I mean, it's the forward plan of cabinet decisions, and this gives members assurance that those items that are scheduled to go to the cabinet will be subject to pre-scrutiny, Chair. So nothing to add.
Excellent. Anyone wish to comment on that? No, don't see anybody. So the next thing is item 4, and this is where we're just going to change it around a bit. We're going to do customer corporate complaints first, and then we're going to do the other 2 reports that Mr. Soderquist is going to deliver. So Julie, I think, is going to start us off on this.
I am. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I just thought I'd introduce myself quickly. My name is Julie Dennett-Seal. I'm the Corporate Complaints Manager. I've been in post for just 12 months now, so you can imagine it's been quite a challenging 12 months for me, considering the way that we've all had to work. I just wanted to explain that the report that you're looking at today isn't a conventional annual complaints report. I recognise that. This particular one is going to be a bit of a hybrid report, because what I thought it was really important for me to be able to do was tell you what I've been doing in post and the improvements that we're actually going to be implementing as part of our enhanced service plan for the corporate complaints. So that's why it probably doesn't look how you would expect an annual performance report to look. Moving forward, it will obviously change, and you will see your stereotypical performance report. So today's one is just going to be slightly different. So if I just run through, my primary purpose when I was employed was to carry out a detailed review of the current processes that we have in place within NCC in terms of the way that we deal and the way that we manage with complaints. Based off of the Ombudsman guidance for principles for good complaint handling, I actually went through and worked on an improvement framework. This is something I've done in other authorities and in an NHS trust, so it's not something out of the ordinary. It's something that a lot of new complaints managers actually do, to look at how the system works. Based off of that improvement framework and working alongside the Ombudsman's guidance, we've actually put some pointers in that actually we could improve in some areas. I think, you know, no service is perfect, so there are areas that we could improve in, and there are aspects of the process that we actually do quite well. Staff engagement in terms of the complaints process is really good, and a lot of people are very engaged and very keen to come on board with a new improved system to engage and deal with complaints on a more local basis and try to resolve complaints when they initially come into the organisation. So with regards to the improvement framework, we've developed it. It's quite a comprehensive plan. One of our changes that we're particularly committed to is developing a centralised complaints team. This will ensure that we've got a singular team, a team of specialists that are there to support local residents, to make sure that the process is more accessible, and that we support the staff that are dealing with complaints as well. This will ensure that we have a more cohesive approach to complaint management. We will be able to get members of the public more engaged in the system, and we'll be able to make sure that everybody's working to the same standards across the organisation. We've got to acknowledge, first of all, that complaint management does not end with the responses that are being sent out, but we need to recognise what a powerful tool feedback is. It shouldn't be seen as a negative tool, it should be seen as a positive. It's free feedback at the end of the day, and that is something that we as a culture within the organisation should accept. It's a very powerful way that we can learn what's going wrong. Also, on the flip side, we can look at what's going right with regards to suggestions and compliments that we receive, which I may point out are far more than the complaints that we receive. But to have a more balanced approach, we need to look at the whole process. One of the parts of my gap analysis that I undertook was to look at the systems that we have in place for recording complaints. It became apparent that the current system that we have for case management, it isn't a bespoke complaints package, which means it's a package that's been developed to house lots of other services and lots of other processes, which then made pulling intelligent data quite challenging in terms of performance reviewing. So although there was data available, it was very hard to be able to compare and contrast the data that we had. So another one of our improvements that we're suggesting is actually looking into having a bespoke complaints case management system. This would mean that we can then liaise with other types of feedback within the organisation a lot easier. We can trend and analyse, which means that we can be proactive, instead of reactive when it comes to hotspots and issues that we need to address. And it would just make engagement with staff and services and with members of the public a lot easier, because we would have that information to hand. So with regards to the current arrangements that are in place, the contact centre is our main point of contact for any complaints that come in. They have the responsibility of allocating and monitoring any communication that comes into the organisation. The staff then liaise with recognised individuals within each service who are recognised as feedback handlers. They actually have other responsibilities, but one of their responsibilities is to liaise with complaints in terms of acknowledging and ensuring that responses are sent out. They appoint investigating officers, and they also ensure that timescales and any information that's needed is actually sought for the investigation of the complaint. It's widely accepted throughout the organisation that complaints are actually dealt with promptly within the confines of the information that's available through the current databases that we have. It is quite a positive view that we have on complaints management, but the amount of complaints that we receive should never be a single point of performance review. We should be able to look at the bigger picture in terms of when you receive complaints, it's not necessarily a bad thing to receive more complaints. Last year's data does show that we received more complaints, but that could be a positive tool. That could mean that we're more accessible, we're more active on social media, people understand how they can actually make complaints, and they're encouraged to do so. That is a very good thing to have that culture. The Ombudsman is very keen for organisations and local authorities to actually promote their complaint system. As I said, it's the outcome of the complaints that is more of a measurable tool that you should be looking at. Lots of services within the organisation are very keen to pilot new initiatives, and I've actually come forward with some ideas about how we can move forward with that. So our two key initiatives that we really want to focus on and take forward are having a centralised complaints team. So I have a team of specialists, subject specialists, that can manage complaints that come in, and that we can make sure that they're being allocated in a timely manner, that we're keeping residents updated, because that was one of the biggest feedbacks that I receive, is that individuals aren't kept updated on their progress. And also it supports staff within the services for the function that they have. If we actually look at the complaints data from the period that I covered in the report, it does suggest that there, as I said, there was an increase. But if we look at the amount of complaints that was actually escalated to stage 2, it's quite small, it's only 5%. Now, when we look at this and compare it to other organisations and benchmark it against findings of other organisations, that's actually quite low. So that would suggest to me that we are doing what we need to do with regards to providing responses. But what we need to improve on is actually obtaining feedback from residents on whether they actually were satisfied. Just because they don't raise a stage 2 doesn't mean that they're happy with the outcome of the investigation. So we need to be able to focus on outcomes of complaints, and then continue with a learning culture within the organisation to keep improving services and what we can actually offer residents. If I look at the Ombudsman information that's available to us, as a benchmark against similar sized organisations, we actually perform really well. The Ombudsman only took forward 25 cases for detailed investigation, and only 9 of those were actually investigated fully, which means that only 35% of the cases that they accepted were investigated. If we compare that to similar organisations, which is an average of 56%, we are below average in terms of performance. And in 100% of the cases where the Ombudsman made recommendations to us, we met those recommendations and implemented and worked with them in regards to their suggestions. So in terms of performance of similar size organisations, we actually are performing quite well. And what we would like to do is to continue performing in that way and building upon the way that we practice within the organisation at the moment. So in terms of what we can do from here, the next actions that we're going to take forward is obviously, as I previously mentioned, with regards to having a centralised complaints team, looking at the procurement of a specifically designed system, and I really truly believe that that's going to be the main important tool in driving forward the culture of complaints management. We're going to refresh our suite of policies, so have a refresh on our complaints policy, our other policies that fall under that responsibility, so our vexatious and unreasonably persistent policy, and any other policies that fall under that umbrella. We're going to create and embed a strong culture within the organisation. So we're going to have some staff training sessions. Staff are incredibly engaged in taking forward complaints and trying to deal with things locally. And what we need to be able to do is give them the tools to do that. So we have a detailed improvement plan which contains a training programme and support available for staff, which in turn will lead to improvements that the residents will see from the management of their complaints. That's an overview of the report that's available, and I hope that next time I see you, I'll have a more detailed account that we'll be able to measure, and we'll see improvements in the figures that I have for you.
Let's hope so, and let's hope we can all be in the same room together instead of each other's dining rooms or
Yeah,
wherever
absolutely.
we are. Are there any questions? I can actually see everybody. So rather than put your electronic hands up, if you just want to indicate on your screen, that would be better for me. That was Colin Horncastle I saw, and then Alan Heppel. You need to unmute, Colin.
Okay, right. The the increase in complaints that you referred to in 2020, was there a particular period, like for example, June and July onwards, where things spiked?
I wouldn't be able to get that information to you to hand now. I can provide a further breakdown at a later point if needed, but in my experience of working in NHS complaints and local government complaints, it could be for such a vast amount of reasons that, you know, without taking a deeper delve into it, but I'm more than happy to do that and provide that at a later date.
Will you provide it to this scrutiny meeting, or could you provide that to me in an email?
Whatever's required of me, I'll be able to do that. So that's not a problem. I mean, the information is freely available, so I can provide that to you.
So, Colin, can I suggest that Julie just sends us all the same email, addresses it to you, copies us, the rest of the committee into it, and if there's any further questions that come out of that, if we can just kind of deal with this through the email system, is that okay? Right, Alan?
Thanks, Chair, and sorry about the camera on my laptop, but it looked like a black and white film, I think. But apologies.
I thought we're back to the 1950s there, Alan.
Yeah, a bit like Boris Karloff. Anyway, I'm waiting to get the laptop fixed, so apologies for that. If you
anyway, carry on.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. It's refreshing your kind of approach to complaints. I think, you know, you're hitting the right buttons there. I mean, I have to say as well that I'm in a previous job. This is one area, service area, where I used to highlight, and I used to get wrong of stuff by saying I love complaints. But and I think that's the kind of culture we need to impress. I've got one or two questions though. I mean, I know that you said there's going to be a review of policies. I mean, part of that would be the individual service standards. And if you fail to meet a service standard, that can generate a complaint. So the kind of feedback loop that you mentioned is quite useful in terms of that. For me, complaints are a great indicator of service improvement. I think that's the key to this. It's not, you know, I'm happy you said they're not negative, because they're not. They should be regarded as positive. I think you're handicapped, from what I'm hearing from you, by the lack of a fully functioning system, which doesn't help. But I think one of the areas I'd be interested in is actually the trends coming out of those complaints, perhaps in particular service areas maybe, and what that tells us about that. But I think the important thing is that service managers need to focus on those trends and actually say, what are they doing to improve the situation in that situation? So in future reports, I think it'll be useful to see trends and how we're dealing with them and how we're improving. So what service improvements are we making as a result of those trends? But thank you very much for the report. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, because it's my favourite topic.
Thank you very much. No, I agree with what you said. I believe some of the most important factors are outcomes of complaints, because if you're a large area like local services, for instance, it's inevitable that they're going to receive more complaints because they're more front services than, say, the cashier's office, for instance, just two random places. But what we need to do is drill down and look at the outcomes and the trends so that we can actually start working on service improvement in those areas. And that's what we currently have difficult doing, using the limitations of the current resources that we have. So what I'm very much used to doing is being able to provide regular updates on trends. So instead of it becoming a problem, we can actually say, look, this seems to be something that we need to concentrate on. Can we make sure this is on everyone's agenda, and can we look at ways that we can deal with it to save complaints having to be made to then go and provide service improvements? We need to be a lot more proactive in terms of how we learn from this type of feedback. So I absolutely agree with what you say, and I am one of those strange people that enjoy complaints as well.
Sorry.
Well, there we are. So we know how to make your day from now on then, do we? Any other questions, or can I, Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Julie. Just a couple of searching questions. I like the idea of your outcomes and your trends, but it's trying to get your head around them. past tense now and in the future. You also mentioned around the new systems and refresh policies. You know, do I have a time scale that we're working to accomplish that? Another thing was that you keep comparing with to other organizations, and it was, what other organizations? Are the other authorities? Are the other, you know, are the hospitals, trusts? I don't know. So just a little bit of clarity around that. A little bit of worry around staff turnover at county as well. When you're pulling this team together, which is really a good idea, that when we pull these teams together, that, you know, that there's a bit of glue there that keeps them together, so we don't have a high turnover, because you're going to constantly be retraining and supporting those people. So this is a key issue. The other thing was, have you done the secret caller? Have you ever tried to approach Northumberland County Council through the contact centre? Because the reality is, if you've ever went down that route, a lot of people just give up the will to live. So really, that's something to really have a look at. And I know that I'm throwing loads of questions there.
No, that's fine.
On page 4 and 5, there seems to be a lot of apologies, financial redress, you know, distress, time, trouble. And I was just wondering, is there a cost tied to all of that? Because if we're redressing, if we're financially redressing somebody, I assume that we are compensating them.
Yep.
So have you got a cost to that?
Okay, so thank you very much. No, that's fine. Thank you very much for your question. So several different things there. So what I actually done in terms of benchmarking was, yes, I did obviously think about previous organisations that I worked at, local authority organisations. I looked at Essex County Council, because that's obviously quite a large council. I also benchmarked against Newcastle and North Tyneside. So as well as some other places, but I did look at local authorities of similar nature and similar sizes to look at that. I also drew upon my experience, which is quite extensive when it comes to complaint management, about teams and restructures. I've restructured 2 separate complaints departments, one within a local authority and one within an NHS trust. Which I feel is really valuable experience. You can put a lot of things down on paper, but when it actually comes down to implementing things, it's a lot better to have the experience. In terms of staff turnover, I strongly believe that if you change people's view on complaints, you change the culture and you stop people from seeing them as a negative tool, people genuinely enjoy being able to help individuals, and you can engage with individuals. And I must say, I don't think I've had a problem with staff turnover within a complaints department. My background is also patient experience. And obviously, I truly believe that you shouldn't just look at the bad in complaints. I think it can be a very satisfying job, and you'll actually be surprised how many people enjoy doing that work. So I think as long as I work on the culture, and make sure that people, you know, we recruit the right people in the first place, that, you know, there's no point recruiting people that have no interest. And I'm quite lucky that there's a lot of people within the organisation that currently undergo the role of complaints feedback handlers that would quite enjoy doing that on a longer term. So I don't think that there's going to be an issue with that. If there was, obviously I'd deal with it at the time, but I honestly believe once we get the deep-rooted culture of complaints and turn it around, and especially with all the improvements that we're going to be making, I think it's a great time for people to come on board and be part of a really positive improvement plan. And with regards to the cost implication, out of all the cases, so there are 9 cases that the Ombudsman actually took forward and actually found upheld some of the issues that we made, some of the concerns that were raised. When we talk about financial redress, those particular cases that they investigated weren't significant amounts of money. So we could be talking anything from £10 upwards. Now, what might be useful for me to make a note of moving forward when I do another report is we can actually, obviously there's I won't be able to put any case details in there, but we can actually put a cost against that so that you have a better understanding of what that what those figures actually are. That doesn't come out of a central budget, that actually comes out of the services budget. But I will say that those particular cases, there wasn't any significant amounts of money.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there any, there was just Alan again?
Jeff,
And Christine?
your hand up for ages. Jeff, just got a quick one. Does the data include complaints from parish and town councils?
No, that's a separate process that's dealt with by our monitoring officer.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry, Christine, I beg your pardon. I see you've got your little, there's a little hand up there in the left-hand corner.
Now it's gone.
Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Electronic hands are dangerous, I think. Can be. Julie, just in terms, I forgot to ask this question earlier, but you referenced low rates of escalation. I just wonder if your future plans include some kind of satisfaction check on those complainants, you know, because that gives an indicator of not just how good your service is, but how well you're doing as a team as well. Absolutely,
Alan. You know, it is something that I absolutely believe as well is really a useful tool in finding out, getting engagement from local residents and a satisfaction. I have on 2 occasions implemented a satisfaction questionnaire, and a few years ago there was a big drive by the Ombudsman to actually do that, and they since revoked it because it's a difficult situation. If you're unhappy with the outcome of your complaint, you're quite likely to give negative negative feedback if it's a questionnaire, and sometimes as well you get those people that are adamantly happy and they provide their feedback. I think it can be a bit of a skewed way of going about it, getting a complaints questionnaire, but I think there's lots of other ways that you can get that feedback, and instead of reactively getting people's responses from their complaint outcomes, I think there's a way we can engage the population, our local population, and we can get their feedback and bring them on board in terms of certain initiatives that we're taking forward. So I think there's absolutely ways we can tick that box. I think I need to be very aware of the ways that we do that, but that is absolutely part of my improvement plan as well. That's something that's definitely on there.
Okay. Anyone else before I just have my 2 pennyworth? It doesn't look like it. Excellent. We're just back to page 4 and 5, which has got the 9 things from the Ombudsman on. Interestingly, 3 of them are planning and 3 of them are education and children's services. So I'm not certain whether, you know, that's probably where people feel more aggrieved. You know, you complain about not getting your bin picked up, but when you don't get your planning application or your kid doesn't get into the school that you wanted to, that's when you're going to really kick off. But interestingly, the planning stuff, none of them have injustice, and all of the education ones do. So maladministration and injustice, then that would seem to me that we need to be looking at the procedures was what it's telling us to do, and I hope we did, and I hope there was some change to that, because, you know, it's all giving somebody reason to complain is one thing, but then compounding it with injustice is another, and we are supposed to, you know, injustice is a thing that we're supposed to be fighting against. But anyway, it is interesting that all of the things that go through the machine, it's planning and education and children's services that seem always, not just because of this, always end up in, you know, in those kind of, you know, the Ombudsman often finds against us, or more often than not, I think. Anyway, so I think what we're saying is that what you've told us today is really good. We're really enthused that we're actually getting a hold of this complaint system now, that instead of having something that, you know, complaints before, well, how can we make the system deal with this? We're actually going to get something that will deal with the complaints rather than it being a bolt onto something and people not understanding that, you know, and having common forms and having a common approach, and, you know, having a system that's going to be appear unbiased as well as being unbiased. I don't think we have been, but it'll appear to be unbiased, which will help. So let's hope it's not another 6 years before we get an annual report. And so I think we would like, from what people have said, we would like to be included in this. So as we go along, would be good to know, you know, maybe know a member briefing on corporate complaints and how are they being dealt with now, and, you know, so that everybody knows that this is what happens. And if they get contacted by residents, they can say, oh, well, this is what will happen next, rather than it being a bit of a mystery. And so I think you've also given us kind of a baseline today. You know, you've told us where we are and where we're going. So I would like to think that, I'm looking at Sean here, 6 months, Sean. Do you think that's long enough for you to have made an impact and got things in place and be able to come back to us and say, this is what I said in February, this is how far I've got?
I absolutely think that that's a reasonable time frame for me to come back and provide you with an update. There are some quite significant changes that are that have some HR challenges around centralising a team, but I would absolutely welcome to come back and give you an update. I'm sure, I would like to think I'm a lot further along with things, and I definitely have some information I can bring back. So yeah, I'm more than happy with that.
Brian, do you want to come in?
Can I just come in on the point that you made, which is a really good point? I don't think we should try and time ourselves into 6 months. I think we should give ourselves a timely gap behind an election, because we don't know if an election is going to happen in May or September. And if we do a 6-monthly review of this, it'll be at the deadline. You know, if there is an election in September, the new council wouldn't benefit from the information that would be delivered. So maybe I would say 3 months after an election, if you can see the point that I'm trying to say, because you could be selling us your policies and, you know, your outcomes, and yet you're going to have to do that again with a new council. So just to be mindful, you know, for the want of time, that's it.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with whatever time frame is proposed. It's an ever changing situation that we've got some short-term goals, we've got some long-term goals, so there will be things that I can update you on. So whatever you feel would be beneficial, I'll be more than happy to meet that.
Some advice from Sean?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, clearly, whenever the election is, as soon as the committee is appointed, we'll be sitting down to produce the work programme for that year, whether it starts in June or whether it starts in September. So part of that process really is to take advice from the previous committee. So if this committee says, can we have a report in 6 months? Obviously, common sense will dictate when that is, depending on when the election is. But also, I wouldn't ask Julie to come back to you unless she had anything meaningful anyway. So by saying 6 months, that would take us to September. I'll have a conversation with Julie at the end of July. If she says, yeah, I'm ready to come, or she might say, actually, there's a little bit of extra, it might be November. So it's all to do with setting the work programme once we know what the committee looks like, whether that be June or whenever.
So are you happy with that, Brian, or do we need to say, I mean, I don't want to drag this out, we want Julie back, we want to be all in a room together, and we want to be talking about how successful she's been able to implement the changes she's bringing in. So it needs to be done, and that time will be determined by the next committee. Are we happy with that then? Yes, I think we are. Is that okay, Sean? He's frozen. I'm going to say that it is. I'm going to use my executive power. Right, excellent. Well, we're going to now move on. You're quite welcome to stay, Alison and Julie, if you wish, or you've got better things to do, then feel free to leave.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, now take care. Right, the next thing we're going to do as you know, I moved the agenda around to facilitate, but I think the next thing we're going to do is C. Is that right? Can you remember what was said? Is Sean still here? Well, I guess it doesn't matter, does it? But I think we're going to do C next, which was the antisocial behaviour in 2020. Now, how we're going to work this, I can see you all now. There are even fewer people here. How this is going to work is we're going to get Philip to talk to us about C first. We're going to let him go through. You're going to think of questions as we go, and at the end, we're going to bombard them with questions rather than interrupt them. Okay, is that okay? I don't see anybody opposing that, so off you go, Philip. This is C, antisocial behaviour in 2020.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. I don't know, I know John Riddle's on the call as well, whether John wanted to say anything in terms of portfolio holder just before we start.
Not really, Phil. I think both these reports, B and C, were both requested by the committee. I think members just need to be cognizant of the fact, we are in the middle of a pandemic. It's caused various issues, which I'm sure you will highlight. I'll just say everything now and then I'll shut up, really. I mean, on the other report, which has got the green dog waters in, all that sort of stuff, I just think that, there's been a lot of, you can hardly buy a puppy at the moment. There's been an awful lot of dogs bought, etc. I think we should maybe actually do a bit of work on the website and things, and maybe try to promote that even more, although it has been a great success. But I'll leave it at that. And, I'm here to be bombarded if people want to criticise me as a member rather than Phil as an officer. I'm up for that.
As if we would ever criticise you, John, honestly.
Okay.
Anything to be criticised about. Okay.
On that note, I shall kick off then. So thanks for the invitation. So it has been said there's two reports this afternoon. The first one deals very much with antisocial behaviour. So I suppose within the report, what we've tried to do is set out what we mean by antisocial behaviour, the approach to dealing with antisocial behaviour, some of our successes, I think some of our challenges, and as has been mentioned, one of those challenges being COVID. So the report does seek to describe within it what we mean by antisocial behaviour. And I think that's important for members to actually understand, because there is a role that we play, but equally when you start talking about higher level antisocial behaviour, there is very much a role for Northumbria Police. So not everything that comes through to us as Northumberland County Council is actually within our gift to resolve. But what I would stress is that we have very strong relationships with Northumbria Police as our key partner, and we work very closely with them on problem solving. So yes, there is a degree of separation between what we're responsible for and what the police, but I suppose if you look at it holistically in terms of what it means for communities in place, we do try and very much work together with them. So the way the report's been set up, and it's been set up to go with just various sort of chunks and looking at the antisocial behaviour. So what I'm going to do is just run through the report in terms of the background and then how we deliver the service. So you'll see within the report, we describe what is antisocial behaviour. So it doesn't actually say that it's noise nuisance or it's this type of activity. It is a form of behaviour which then leads to harassment, alarm or distress, etc., or conduct capable of causing nuisance. So there is a definition. There are then numerous powers made available to us in legislation which allow us to deal with antisocial behaviour. And I suppose they range from everything from, you'll be familiar with the community protection warning, community protection notices, right through to actually closure orders. So the community protection notice is very much the informal end of the scale, advising somebody that their behaviour is causing concern, and that if they don't abate that behaviour, we will take enforcement action, and that can be by fixed penalty notice or through to actual sort of prosecution. We do actually have some quite significant powers though under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, and that does allow us to actually close premises down, and that is a power we have used in the last 12 months. where we've had premises leading to antisocial behaviour, nuisance, or should I say, the activity of the residents leading to antisocial behaviour and nuisance, where we found it necessary, again, working probably with the police or solely, to actually close the premises down. Now, if we revert back to the old adage that, you know, every Englishman homes his castle, or every English person's home is their castle, it's a significant power where the court will actually grant us an authority to close those premises down. And we've done that in Blythe, we've done it in Berwick, we've done it in a number of other areas. When using the power, we actually have an ability to either close it down to visitors and or in the extreme to the residents themselves, so we can actually prevent occupation of the residents themselves. So there is a huge range of powers available to us, and what my officers do is they always try and find the most appropriate power to deal with the situation. So we're always trying to be proportionate. We will apply what's often referred to as the 4 E's in terms of engagement, education, etc., with enforcement being one of them. In terms of the delivery of the service, it's not a large service when you think about it from a county council perspective and the geography of Northumberland, principally delivered through the community safety team, which comprises 6.6 full-time officers in terms of community safety officers with technical support. And when you look at what that team's doing, that's, you know, all aspects of community safety, antisocial behaviour, noise, nuisance, etc., across Northumberland. It is quite a remit for them to actually undertake. So what we do across public protection for all our complaints is we operate a triage function. So when complaints are received from the public, we will try and identify what the issues are, what the degree of risk and concern is, and then what our response is. So we won't automatically deploy an officer to deal with an issue. We will determine what the most appropriate response is. And often that is very much about sending log sheets out to people, so we get a good understanding of what the problems are, the frequency, and ultimately whether or not we can take action. But you know, that has worked successfully for us for a number of years. Talking a little bit about the actual delivery of the service, yes, a lot of it's done by the officers direct, but as I stressed before, we do an awful lot of partnership working, and what you'll be familiar with is the VOL, the victim offender location process. So many of the problems can be resolved by single agencies, but where they can't, we have a 4-weekly meeting in each of the police sector areas, which brings together again partners, where we can look at issues, look at the challenges, and then try and find an agreed solution. And we will bring people into that meeting as appropriate. Where the VOL can't actually resolve the process because it's either very complex or it needs greater intervention, we have an internal escalation process, which is referred to the ASBRAC, the Antisocial Behaviour Risk Assessment Conference. And again, that's for more senior officers, but it may be a case of actually having to release resources to do something differently, whether that's financial resources or staffing resources. But again, it's been very successful in how we've rolled that out across Northumberland. Team also deals with a range of other areas linked to antisocial behaviour. So you'll all be familiar with the fact that we deploy CCTV where it's required to do so. We talk about prevent and contest, which we'll come on to later in the agenda, but also managing things such as the public space protection orders as well, which are referenced. So overall, what have we seen in the last 12 months? When you look at the table, which is presented in terms of category, what you will notice is that for this year to date, we're only reporting 7 months. But if you do a basic comparison in the total number of complaints over the year, highest number we had in the recent sort of 4 years was back 2017-18, where we had 916 complaints. For the first 7 months of this year, we'd actually recorded 700 complaints. So if you scale that up, we're potentially looking at potentially 1,200 complaints in this financial year. There's a number of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is undoubtedly linked to the restrictions around COVID, the national lockdowns, and I think the impact we've seen on some of our communities and some of our residents. So in simple terms, Northumberland are not unique in this, and it's evidenced by other local authorities and the police. We have seen the very fact that people have been in a lockdown and therefore unable to go out, unable to socialise, etc., we have probably seen more cases linked to household matters or noise and nuisance from domestic premises. And I think that's coupled with the fact that when you've got people in a national lockdown who are spending significantly more time within their own homes, the degree of tolerance has changed as well. So where people in the past potentially would have tolerated something, or a noise wasn't an issue because they never heard it because they were out of the house at the time and things of that nature, what we're definitely seeing is a reduction in the tolerance levels and an escalation in the number of complaints we're seeing. The other thing we've seen, not significantly, but again has been reported in policing circles, is an escalation. So that's an escalation from something that was quite a minor issue in terms of noise and nuisance, potentially leading to physical abuse or physical violence between neighbours. And that's very much linked back to the issue of COVID. So when you look through that long list, which is how we categorise our antisocial behaviour complaints, you will see when you look through things like just doing an order, which is number 4, intimidation, harassment. We have 129 complaints to date. So that probably is going to take us up to the higher levels where we've ever been in the past. In terms of rowdy or inconsiderate behaviour, we're already topping the level we've seen in previous years at 260 complaints. And again, when you look at things like noise nuisance, it's 42 complaints to date. So it is going to take us above the levels of the last 2 years. And I say some of that is undoubtedly directly linked to the COVID restrictions and the lockdown. In terms of COVID and the impact upon service delivery, like many of the council services, what we saw really from March the 23rd last year through until probably June, July was a very much restricted service. Obviously staff working from home. Also, I think a lot of uncertainty and a lack of guidance about what staff could do, in terms of national guidance. Could they visit people's homes? Could they enter with noise recording equipment, etc., etc. So we did actually see a reduction in our response, but in our physical response, but we maintained that through telephone contact and triage. But undoubtedly, it has impact upon service delivery over the last 12 months. In terms of public space protection orders, in this context, these are the orders that we have in place, which are set in place to deal with alcohol consumption in public places. Just need to be clear about this. Whilst there's a public space protection order, it doesn't ban alcohol consumption in that area. What it does, it provides a power to the police and the council to take positive action if a person is found to be consuming alcohol in a public place, which amounts to, as reason likely to amount to, antisocial behaviour. So having a PSPO in place doesn't prevent somebody, group of individuals, well, can't have a group of individuals at the moment, obviously, but doesn't prevent people coming together and having a drink. What it prevents is them coming together and causing antisocial behaviour. One of the things we did see when we did the review of the PSPOs last year was a request for new areas. So we did add on 2 areas, one of which was Wylam, and that was as a direct consequence of some of the issues being experienced with COVID, where we had a lot of people travelling from outside of Northumberland, outside of Wylam, by train to Wylam, purchasing alcohol and then congregating at the river, the parks, etc., etc. So Wylam was added into the PSPO for that. Overall, in terms of, I would suggest our performance, looking at the tables, within the first 2 quarters, we've achieved our performance targets for actually response within 3 working days. And in terms of our target for responding to resolution, again, we've achieved our targets then as well for resolving complaints as well. So again, I would say that's been a positive position for us. And just picking up on the session you've just had previously, we do try to do customer satisfaction. And again, we are seeing good levels of customer satisfaction. I dare say that customer satisfaction comes from the person who's raised the complaint, as opposed to the perpetrator, who probably isn't as satisfied as the actual person making the complaint in the first place. In terms of the emerging issues for us, We are seeing some issues around youth disorder, not in the same way that we've seen it in the past. Historically, we've often seen issues around the spring and the summer, etc., etc. Again, COVID's had some impact upon that, but we have seen some issues around some of the public spaces and car parks, etc., etc. And again, this is probably linked back to the issue of COVID and unlawful gatherings. But I think a common one we get is around vehicles and youth disorder involving vehicles, which often though is very much a matter led by the police as well. But again, we have done some work with the police on youth disorder. But I think if we go back to the 4 E's, what we probably recognise is that in terms of youth disorder, it is far better for us to engage and educate and probably provide resources and assistance to try and do some of the diversionary activities and or support existing and ongoing youth work. And it's not uncommon when we're dealing with youth disorder to often find that there is a key individual, a ringleader, whatever you want to call them, and often people follow them. So what we will often do is try and target that one person or that group of individuals to try and affect the behaviour of the group, as it were. Violence Reduction Unit, very much hosted by the Police and Crime Commissioner. Work we're doing with the Police and Crime Commission on the VRU is again very much targeted a number of key objectives in terms of youth diversion, reducing reoffending, working with families and connecting communities. The idea of the VRU was very much born out of knife crime and violent crime. It's probably now in its sort of second year, but again, it's an area we work strongly with in trying to develop regional and national, regional and national working, and again, I suppose using all the resources available to us to try and bring about the best outcomes for our communities. Final one I'll touch upon, because I think this was of particular interest to the actual committee, was nitrous oxide. And I think general issues and concerns around nitrous oxide. So the report sets out the detail there. It is controlled by the Psychoactive Substances Act, but as a product, it is not in itself an illegal product. It is very much used in the catering industry. It's not a restricted product. So the challenge can often be for the police and other agencies about why has somebody got nitrous oxide and why is it being sold to them, which is often the difficult nut to crack. We do know that nitrous oxide is being used by people in terms of the means of getting a quick high from the drug itself, from the nitrous oxide. And you'll often see the small canisters left behind where they've been using it. But as I say, it's not actually a prohibited substance and it's not age restricted. There has been some successful prosecution and work done in Newcastle, because we haven't seen the same scale of problems in Northumberland, where quite clearly groups have been purchasing large volumes of nitrous oxide as an illegal high on the pretense of it being for the catering industry. But I think had the right checks and balances been put in place, it was quite clear that those acquiring the product weren't using it within the catering industry. But it is something we are starting to see an increasing problem with. And undoubtedly, so I know Rick's on the call as well, it's probably something that local services are identifying within some of our parks and open spaces where the canisters are being left as well. So very much an area which is trying to, I suppose, join the dots in terms of what local services are encountering and what we're experiencing from the point of view of antisocial behaviour otherwise. Overall, challenging year. Need to deploy resources into COVID activity where the priority's been. But I think what I would like to stress in conclusion is, whilst we had some challenges in delivering the service, we have still maintained that service. We have still responded to our residents across Northumberland. And I think we have had some good successful outcomes, but undoubtedly there is still a challenge, in dealing with antisocial behaviour. And I think, it is one that we just need to keep working with, but very much around the 4 E's and very much a partnership approach, including yourself as elected members. I will pause for breath, Chair.
Thank you. Excellent. Questions for Mr. Soderquist? Right. First up was Alan Heppel, then Eileen Carty.
Right. Thank you. I have trouble getting this button clicked. Sorry. Phil, thank you for the presentation. Very informative, extremely so, in my opinion. One of the areas that what I'm not sure about is what particular tenure does this team sort of focus on? Because I'm aware that housing providers generally have their own sort of ASB teams, as it were. The other query is that, well, two, I suppose. One is that if you're dealing with essentially the private sector, if I can describe it as that, I don't know if that's the case, we have a lot of estates that are mixed tenure. So you have a council estate which has private rented, owner occupiers, and there can be a clash there in terms of what your guys are doing and the housing providers doing. So there's another area of concern. The other one is I'm surprised about the few complaints on domestic abuse. That seems, I just wonder if there's a link there with the homelessness side in terms of the team.
So, in order, it principally deals, Councillor Heppel, with non-NCC housing. So you're absolutely right. We have our own tenancy involvement team, antisocial behaviour team within housing. So this is predominantly looking at everything which is non-council. And the reason I say everything which is non-council is because the team will get inquiries from tenants of other housing providers. So again, what we will try and do within that process is we will probably look to the housing provider to deal with it as a tenancy related issue or exhaust their powers first of all. But where we deal with things on a mixed tenure basis, we will ensure that whether it's public protection dealing with, you know, NCC housing or dealing with Carbon, Benicia, Coast and Castles, there will be a link in there. So through the VOL process, we will invite other landlords into that form. So if we've got a particular problem with a particular area or house or tenant or private sector, we will try and marry up the right partners, and that could include bringing in the SB team from another social housing provider to do that. So we try and join that up. In terms of, I think, the question of domestic abuse, I think what we all know is that unfortunately domestic abuse still remains significantly underreported, and I think for every incident of domestic abuse, you know, I think the suggestion is there's probably 30 offences before a victim will actually ask for help and will raise help. So there is undoubtedly an underreporting issue. Many of them will go to the police because fundamentally that will be a police activity rather than antisocial behaviour activity. But clearly where we are made aware of something which could start off as a noise nuisance type issue, but actually as we get into it, we realise there are more issues. We will refer that to the police. But a lot of the areas of criminality, you know, whether it be drugs misuse, domestic abuse, will just be passported straight across to the police. What I will say though, just again for members' benefit, within the housing service last year, we actually went through a process in terms of what's referred to as the DAHA, the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance. So Northumberland County Council's housing service is actually accredited by DAHA. And what that hopefully tells me is what I already hoped was in place, is that we have good, robust procedures in place for working with and responding to concerns from our tenants. So we actually have that accreditation now. And as part of that, I will finish this off, it's a little bit of a tangent, but as part of that, what we actually did with our own workforce and our stress workforce, we took them all through domestic abuse training. So that's not just the housing officers, that's the repairs and maintenance teams as well. It's the gas engineers. So they are all in a position across NCC housing stock, hopefully to identify some of the signs of domestic abuse and then make an appropriate referral. So hopefully that answers your questions, Councillor Heppel.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Phil. I'm really pleased you've got the DAHA accreditation too.
Excellent. Thank you. Eileen?
Hiya, Phil. Just to quickly, first of all, I do think your team's done really well during this pandemic because the COVID laws that you have been given haven't really been definitive, they're quite vague and can be perceived in many different ways. So well done coming together as a team to try and get some kind of definitive outcomes. The second thing was you actually answered my youth disorder question. My third one was the nitro oxide. There is more of that around Blythe at the moment, and it's usually in areas where our council work team don't get into, you know, like the over on Crofton Field and places like that, where we have a particular issue with it. Just to note that. No, but what I want to come on to is this current lockdown. It's supposed to be a lockdown, but it's certainly not like a lockdown it was in the beginning, right? So that must have been, it must be quite difficult to deal with because there's still people milling around here, there and everywhere. And my question is, from the beginning to now, is the kind of antisocial behaviour getting more, or is it sort of being balanced throughout the whole time since April last year?
I think, first of all, I mean, thanks for the thanks, and I'll pass that on to the team because it has been very much a team effort across this process. I think in terms of the lockdown, Councillor Carty, I mean, I think from a professional point of view, we would say it's not the same lockdown as we had in March of last year. I think part of the reason that is, when the lockdown was introduced by Boris Johnson on the 23rd of March, businesses and society, I suppose, weren't prepared. So we actually saw many businesses close down because they weren't able to actually offer, as it were, click and collect services and other types of activities.
Yeah.
Many businesses have now changed their operating model and are much more, I suppose, the better position to actually provide services that they weren't able to do last year. So that gives you a slightly different feel to the lockdown.
Yeah.
I think what needs to be understood with the lockdown as well, a significant part of the regulations dealing with the lockdown also deal with the exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many, many exceptions in law why people can leave the home.
Right.
And, you know, that's everything from work, you know, all the way through to, you know, attending a funeral. So there's a whole broad range of why people can leave their home. And when you get into that area of actually sort of high street shops, there's a whole range of high street shops can remain open and legally can remain open. So I think that's why you've got a different look and feel to it. I think where we've seen some of the challenges around COVID, the lockdown and antisocial behaviour has probably still been linked to the hospitality trade.
All right.
Not so much in Northumberland, but we have had some issues in Northumberland where arguably businesses have been compliant. So they've done everything by means of click and collect, no customers allowed on the premises. But where there was a weakness was it didn't stop people, as it were, going to a premises, a pub, buying alcohol, and then walking around the streets and drinking it. That's when you sort of trick into your, you know, public space protection orders. Newcastle City Council had major problems with that in the town centre, the quayside and other places. But I think what we saw probably early on was high levels of compliance with the regulations, businesses, communities, etc., etc. I think people being restricted to their own homes and gardens or exercise was probably easier when you had that good weather back in April through to May, June.
Yeah.
What we're now seeing, though, I think is just an element of COVID weariness. People have been in lockdown one way or another now for 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
What people were prepared to tolerate, they are less so to do now. And I think there is a degree of frustration in that. You know, for some people, you look at this and think, in March of last year, would we still be having this conversation in February of this year? Many people probably thought not. So I think the level of sort of just general weariness has increased. And it's something Councillor Reid and I were speaking at before. I still though believe that the vast majority are trying to follow the rules, but there will always be a minority. And unfortunately, it's the minority which then create the issues and the challenges for us. One final comment, you know, in terms of people being out and about, I think what also needs to be understood is that the police don't have a general power to stop people and ask where they're going and what they're doing. So, you know, they could be going to shops, they could be going to work, they could be doing anything. They could equally be doing things which are not lawful, but the police really don't have the capacity nor the legal powers just to stop somebody and say to them, where are you going? And then try and actually evidence where they are going. So that is always going to be a challenge for us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for that full response, Phil. I've got Brian Gallagher indicated that we wanted to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chair Phil, for the report. Just a couple of maybe highlights. The report there starts off on page 4 with the 4 graphed lines down. I'm mindful of the dates there, you know, from the 1st of the 4th, 20 to the 31st of the 10th. So it's not a full-on year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it sets a lot of alarm bells. And I think you've probably highlighted the issues around COVID. But it sets a lot of alarm bells when it's, you know, I've indicated what, at least 6, 7 titles of concern. So although we seem to be monitoring, I would like to see maybe a year-end review of the whole lot. And obviously things will be a lot worse than what they were. Very mindful that all local councillors in most urban areas, dare I say, I think one of the big complaints that I'm getting is because the streets are so quiet and everybody is, you know, adhering to the rules, that you're finding that the streets are very quiet. So you've got a lot of speeding cars around there. And it's been highlighted on numerous times with the police, the local council I attend. So there are massive concerns around road safety in itself. On that graph as well, one of them is on page 5, and it's inappropriate sexual behaviour. I've been working in an area in my ward, which I won't name, which has been really a bad story behind that. And yet it's not even noted on this report. And I'm mindful that you said that you have vol meetings every 4 weeks. I put some small member schemes money in there to address that and trying to reduce the concerns for the public. So that there in itself is a concern to me, that if there's nothing being brought up, you know, I know that I've been working hand in hand with the police. And my other concern is that, you know, I know that there's been numerous requests from county councillors in Ashington, and I'm sure it'll happen in Blythe and Lynmouth and places like that, where, you know, we want with CCTV cameras up there to monitor issues and problems around. And I'm just looking back there, you know, request for CCTV running up to this 6-7 month cycle has been 0, 0, 0. So I think that maybe we should utilize the machines and the tools that we've got to help you guys do your role for that. The last point I wanted to make, and it's more for a point of clarity for me, Ashington was one of the first towns in the country to have a full town DPPO, which meant no drinking on the streets anywhere. That was the order. And I know that there was new ruling came over to take that on. I just didn't know if, I think you mentioned the PSPO, you know, the comparison between the two, does one outweigh the other, or does one help the other? Thank you very much. Thanks, Phil.
Right. So I'll try and take those in order, Brian. If I miss anything, by all means, come back to me. So in terms of the reporting, you're absolutely right. And it only covers the first 7 months. And that was partly because we were originally trying to get the report tabled before Christmas. So we took it to the last sort of full period we could, should I say. But I think, yes, that's why I've tried to sort of extrapolate from those figures. And I think we will see areas where we've got higher incidents. And it's a difficult one, because I think some of the numbers will definitely go up. But I do believe a large proportion of that is attributable to COVID, as opposed to an actual a trend that we will see in future years. So I think we've got a blip in the system because of COVID, which we've just got to manage through as well. In terms of just on that issue around speeding, etc., that would clearly be an area where we would divert that to Northumbria Police, because obviously it's not an offence that we could actually going to say police. It's not an area that we would be responsible for in terms of general antisocial behaviour. So anything to do generally with speeding, vehicle crime will go to the police, you know, from our perspective. The one you've alluded to, I'm happy to have a conversation offline about, you know, the inappropriate sexual behaviour, etc. I mean, I don't know if that's come through to us as an ASB, because what we're reporting here is the data available to NCC. There'll be a whole raft of information on top of this, which Northumbria Police have got. So if Northumbria Police have taken an inquiry from yourself or from the public, it won't feature in our records. They will have it recorded in their system as well. In terms of CCTV, I would say that the use of CCTV now is far more effective than it was about 5 years ago, where we had the fixed town centre systems. I think having the ability to deploy is much more effective. We've had much more benefit from those systems, albeit there is still going to be some limitations on when we can deploy, whether that's limited to just staff resources to do so, or having enough evidence to support the deployment of the camera. Because what we can't be seen to doing is just placing cameras out without it being a proportionate response to an issue, because we are subject to audit by the Information Surveillance Camera Commissioner as well. So again, we've got to be clear about when we use cameras and how we use them, but clearly they do have a purpose. I think the thing just be mindful of with CCTV, and this has definitely been experienced in the past, I think they are very effective at dealing with some town centre issues, unfortunately where alcohol is involved, because people let their guard down. Where you put them in places where you're sort of just generally doing monitoring, it often has the tendency to displace the problem, because people are aware the cameras are there and they actually make a conscious decision to do whatever the activity was somewhere else. In a town centre, when you've got alcohol involved, those inhibitions go and you actually capture a lot on CCTV. So I think CCTV is a fantastic tool, but it has to be used in the right way to get the right results. But yes, happy to look at how we use that and how we deploy that further. In terms of the final question around DPPO and PSPO and the world of acronyms generally, so the original was the Designated Public Places Order. That was actually replaced with the PSPO. So all of our DPPOs transitioned across into become public space protection orders. But broadly speaking, it is the same tool, but it has replaced what was the original DPPO. But just to stress again, the important thing to remember with the PSPO, it is not a ban on alcohol consumption. It is a tool to deal with antisocial behaviour arising from alcohol consumption. That's generally how it's applied. So if you want to go to the park, get out the tartan blanket, have a glass of Chardonnay or a can of Stella, that's absolutely fine. It becomes an issue when that starts to lead to antisocial behaviour. That's why it's there as a mechanism to control that activity. I don't know if I've covered everything, Brian, but I'm happy to come back on anything.
Thank you, Phil. And I think you probably have, but the reason why I brought up the DPPO was that, like I said before, it was Ashington was the first town to have it done county-wide. So the reality is it's maybe a heads up for other people in other areas that, you know, if you are having problems within your town centres, you know, don't just look at the town centres, look at the town as a whole to get an order there, because it's a lot of hard work to get done, to get, and once you've got it, you can use it as a tool. You don't have to use the whole lot, but you can use it as a tool. But thank you very much. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Okay, I would have thought being in possession of a tartan blanket was an arrestable offence, Mr. Soderquist, but you know.
Other blankets are available.
Liz Dunn, and then I've just got a couple of things to wrap it up and then move on. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Reid. I just wanted to ask Phil, I'm just looking at that table, the same one on page 5 and this year's columns. I'm just a bit, I can't understand why the likes of fly tipping and littering and also inappropriate use of fireworks has a nil entry in there, because they have been sort of real sources of complaints that come through to me. So is it just that people don't report these, or?
I can only present to you, Councillor Dunn, what's actually reported through our system. So the simple answer would be, unless we've had that report and logged that report, it won't appear in our statistics. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but unless it's sort of reported and categorised, no, it won't feature in there.
Yeah, I mean, I know it does, and I think that's the hard thing, is to get to keep pressing people to report these, because they just seem to have stopped doing it in many cases.
I think, again, when you look at the issue of fly tipping, because there is a second report, obviously, on environmental enforcement, there's an awful lot of the fly tipping complaints where they either go to Rick's team or come straight through to us, so they won't actually even enter the ASB system, as it were, because they've gone through a different reporting channel. That's where they'll get picked up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Just to come back on what Councillor Dunn said, I think perhaps one of the reasons the firework thing isn't more than it is because this report only goes to the 30th of October. So, you know, you probably find that when this is caught up, there's more. Just it on pages 4 and 5, the chart. What does C1 and C2 in brackets mean?
So the C1 and C2 will be the category 1 and category 2. So the category 1s where we would expect to see a 24-hour response to the inquiry. So it's purely and simply a prioritisation.
Right, good. That's fine. And on the same chart, the very last thing has got safeguarding stroke vulnerability. There weren't any when this started. Is that because the rules changed? I can't imagine it was.
So honest answer to the question is, so the categorisation we take from a national list, it is probably more likely that we just weren't categorising that way back in 2017-18.
I thought as much. That's fine.
Yeah.
And just to get back to the nitrous oxide thing, that was one of the reasons I think we wanted you to come and talk to us about this. And I'm sure that most of us are quite astonished that there's no prohibition on its sale. So is there something we could write in the minutes, or is there something we can say that we would like to see some sort of restrictions brought in on the sale of this product? Is that something we can say, just flag up our concern? Because it seems a bit mad to me that, you know, you can't buy cigarettes if you're under 16, and yet you can buy this stuff, which is instantly more dangerous. I mean, not in the long term, but, you know, you could literally kill yourself with one dose of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that, how I can see most people are kind of agreeing with me. Is there something we can put in the minutes that we would like to say? I realise it's not the, you know, not the council can't do anything about it, but at least if we 9 have flagged it up somewhere, you know, and later on we can say, well, we did suggest something like this. Is that, I don't know whether Sean or Philip can suggest anything, but I don't see anybody disagreeing with me. So even if it's just a note in a minute.
There is another option which I've just mulling over, Jeff. So we link in with what's called OPS&S, Office of Product Safety and Standards, which is the body which really advises the government on regulations, etc. And we've got a strong link in through COVID. So I mean, it's not impossible for us just, I suppose, to try and have some contact with OPS&S to look at any options to think about an age restriction on it. We can at least make an inquiry of OPS&S to ask that question, should you wish us to do so.
Oh, is that something we can all agree on? It looks as though, yeah. So if we could do that, that would be great. And then it feels as though, you know, it's because there'll be other councillors sitting in other forums like this saying something should be done, because it is plainly ridiculous. So that'd be great if we could do that. Thank you very much indeed. And we're now on to B, which was the thing that I moved to the end of the end of the agenda for reasons which I shan't go into. And this is environment enforcement and public engagement activities in 2020. This is Philip again. It's the same thing. He's going to go through it. If you've got any comments or questions, make a quick note and we'll get back to him in the end rather than stop his flow. Thank you, Philip.
Okay, so I'll not repeat myself, try not to. So again, we very much use the 4 E's in this area. Yes, COVID's had an impact upon us, again, between sort of March and July. Give you some context. So in terms of environmental enforcement, current staffing levels are 6 environmental enforcement officers. And we also have 2 community protection officers as well. So that's the core resource of Northumberland County Council, funded through NCC funding. We also have another 3 officers which are funded through the SLA agreements with town and parish councils. So we've got a complement of 9 plus 2. What I would stress is that the role of the SLA, or the purpose of the SLA, is just to enhance the activity within that particular geography. So whether there's an SLA or not, there will be a resource, there will be a response provided from the environmental enforcement team as a county-wide activity. But again, it is a relatively small resource to cover Northumberland. But what we have done is put some SLAs in place with town and parish councils where they've expressed the interest to work with us. And that has undoubtedly given us more capacity, but it's also given more focus into those areas on a dedicated basis. We have seen some challenges from COVID in that whilst we're continuing to do investigations and enforcement, we struggled a little bit with the lack of a suitable PACE interview room, sorry, PACE being Police and Criminal Evidence Act interview room. And that was just the sheer mechanics of how do you bring people in during a pandemic to actually interview them under caution. So we had to create a new PACE interview room with means of access and egress, screens, etc., etc. And we've also seen some challenges with the court system, because there's been significant periods of time when the court system has been stood down or only dealing with high priority cases. So they just have, I suppose, they've generated a backlog for us in terms of how we're dealing with the cases. I would say though, over the last 12 months, again, where we have gone forward with prosecution or otherwise, we've got a 100% success rate. So across the 15 prosecutions, we've got a 100% success rate with the court system. Report again talks about dog control. And again, we've refreshed the public space protection orders for the dog control areas in Northumberland. And again, it sets out in the report, so I'll not go through them, where those PSPOs exist and the purposes of those PSPOs. We've continued with the Green Dog Walkers initiative. Haven't done as much work with the Green Dog Walker scheme this year, just because you couldn't bring those large volumes of people together. But what you will see is that we've now got in excess of 3,800 members of the Green Dog Walker scheme. And from a standing start of 2017, that is absolutely phenomenal. And we've recruited this year about another 500, if memory serves me right. So, well, actually it's 546, it was the next part on the report. So again, you can see about the Green Dog Walker scheme. So we're getting good support. I can't remember which elected member said this, I think it might have been Councillor Riddle. There is actually a shortage of dogs in terms of actually people buying dogs, having dogs as companions. And I think there's also been an increase in actual dog theft as well, as people want companion animals. But we've done very well with actually boosting the numbers of our Green Dog Walker scheme. And I suppose through the Green Dog Walker scheme, what we're trying to do is use the community asset, the community resource, to work with us and be our eyes and ears. And arguably, you can expand that across any part of environmental enforcement, you know, whether it be the staff that I've got or the staff that Rick's got in terms of civil enforcement staff. That is a limited resource. And what we really need to try and do is garner and harness the support of the wider population in our communities to actually be the eyes and ears, to actually be, you know, the custodians of the environment, as it were. So we've renewed the PSPOs, very successful, the Green Dog Walker scheme. And again, you know, across dog control, we are still seeing high numbers of complaints. We've had a number of staffing issues in there. But again, we are, I think, able to respond to the complaints that are coming in and provide a response. Enforcement activity has been limited. I think the only thing I would say about that is, I think if you go back 5 or 6 years, probably within this committee, and you looked at our performance from the point of fixed penalty notices, etc., we were probably in the lowest tier in terms of what our enforcement amounted to in actual FPNs. That position was turned around within 3 to 4 years, and we were probably one of the highest performing in terms of actually issuing FPNs, etc., etc. I suppose a bit like complaints, though, FPNs aren't always a measure of success. I think what we look at now is we are seeing lots of complaints, which is a positive, you know, in terms of reporting. But I think the Green Dog Walker scheme has actually seen probably a reduction in the number of complaints we've got, because we have more positive action out there dealing with people allow the dog to foul. You know, they are being approached in public by the Green Dog Walker scheme. Having said that, you will see one of the points within the report that we did actually take prosecution against the professional dog walker. So you'll have all seen them. People who will actually walk your dog, you know, collect it in a van, take it for a walk, etc., etc. So we had a professional dog walker early last year from Wallsend, comes into Northumberland, comes to Blythe, walks the dogs, let them foul. But she was prosecuted and fined £550 with costs on top of that. Fly tipping. This is an area, I think, where we are seeing a number of challenges at the moment. We're seeing a lot of increase in fly tipping locally. Again, if you go back to COVID, we definitely had some challenges in the first lockdown because there were some, you know, some of the actual wasteful recycling centres were closed, etc., etc. It wasn't lawful to travel for those purposes. I think in a lot of instances, even if you set that aside, there were facilities for people to actually dispose of their waste. They just sought not to do so because they thought it was easier to actually fly tip the waste and fly tip the products themselves. And unfortunately, what we see quite often is, whilst we have fly tipping, and that could be anything from large white goods to household materials, etc., etc., we don't often have enough evidence to actually then follow the prosecution. So the evidence we require is either the detail of the vehicle that was involved in the activity itself, so somebody's observed it and they've passed it through to us, or within the waste itself, there is something there which allows us to track back to where the waste has come from. And, you know, again, we work very closely with local services. The local services teams will do the initial investigation, and if there is nothing there which provides us with any indication of where the waste has come from, the waste will then be removed as fly tipped, because there's no success or no likelihood of success on prosecution. If we've got something within that material, it will be identified, it will be photographed and bagged if needs be, and then we'll follow up with a prosecution. But, you know, if you look at the numbers in there, we're probably receiving, there's probably 3 times as many fly tipping incidents as there are investigations. And that's not because we're not prepared to investigate, it's just the evidence is not there enough to take it forward for us. Again, we've seen some challenges just around pace and pace interview. So we do have, I think the last time I asked the question, we've probably got about 80 pending investigations and pace interviews that we're still required to follow up on from fly tipping activity. But notwithstanding, we have still been doing investigations and fixed penalty notices. We've done still some targeted work. We couldn't do some of the targeted work that we do every year as part of the sort of Keep Britain Tidy campaigns. And again, that's simply been a consequence of the fact that you couldn't bring gatherings together and do some of that work. But again, where it has been appropriate for us to take enforcement action, we have done that, and there are examples set out in the report again for yourselves as members. We're still seeing an issue of accumulations on private land, where ostensibly that falls to the landowner to deal with, as opposed to the county council to clear up. But again, where we can, there's an example there where we've dealt with a landlord who failed to remove large quantity of rubbish and accumulated rubbish on the premises. we took a prosecution for when we got a fine of £660 with costs awarded as well. Interestingly, one of the things we have to think about, we've thought, you know, long and hard about in terms of COVID, is the issue of protection of staff. So we had a long debate about the protection of staff and how do they deal with the risk of COVID to them when they're dealing with people in the street, whether that's from dog fouling, littering, etc., because they are exposed to a risk and trying to gather that information. So that is a concern for us. But again, what you'll see in the report is not so much the risk from COVID, but where we've had an officer dealing with somebody and the individual who was issued with a ticket then confronts the civil enforcement officer and threatened them. Fortunately, I think the court dealt with that by actually dealing with them for a littering offence as well as the sort of harassment offence as well. But there is a risk to all of our staff, including those within local services, who are dealing with face-to-face enforcement and, you know, placed in that position of actually issuing a fixed penalty notice. So it is a challenging role for the individuals, but, you know, again, we hopefully provide them with the right resources, the right tools, and where possible, you know, we will take that through to a prosecution if there's been a threat to our staff. But again, all of our work, coming back to some of the questions that have been asked by the members about, has this been reported, has that been reported? All of our work is evidence-led. So if we get the complaints, that does help, and that does help us to shape and inform where we direct our resources. And that's what we do on a continual basis. Mentioned a little bit about the waste control campaign. So we couldn't do the initial campaign, but we did take part in the Great British Spring Clean, which bizarrely was in September. And I think spring probably ends probably a bit earlier than that. But where we can, it comes back to, we'll work with our communities, we'll do things in partnership with others, and we will look at trying to develop campaigns. So we have tried to do the Love Where You Live campaign, very much about trying to get people to, you know, respect and look after their own community and actually challenge the behaviour of others who actually aren't doing that and aren't looking after their communities themselves. So again, Chair, that's just a brief summary of what we've done, but I would say overall within challenging times, we are still trying to sort of pick up on the issues. We are trying to work with our communities and try and just maintain and improve Northumberland as a place where people want to come and live and visit.
Excellent. Questions for Philip on this one, anybody? Liz?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask Councillor Riddle, but I think he's left. But I've just got to come back on the Green Dog Walker scheme, Phil, because I know it comes over as being, you know, a huge success. And I've said it at one of these meetings before, that just isn't the case in my area. And these figures that we've gotten here, where it shows how many have joined in the Castle Morpeth area, that's a bit meaningless to me, actually. And I wonder if we could have that down a bit more local to ward level. The dog mess situation is still the big thing. Loads of complaints every day, and I'll be honest, they've got the option of asking for street cleansing when this happens as well. I've got cases still open on my members' service request that have been there for 3 months and beyond. But certainly the Green Dog Walker scheme hasn't had the impact within my ward that it, in fact, somebody put one of the leaflets through my door, through my letterbox last week, and asked, do you think this would be a good idea? Do you think the council would do it?
So I think, I mean, with the Green Dog Walkers initiative we've got, I mean, I think the numbers are good. I mean, it's 3,800, nearly 4,000 people. But I suppose when you put that in the context of the whole Northumberland population, it's still a relatively small number of advocates that you've got. I do think it's had a benefit for us, and I do think it has affected the actual behaviour of some people. But I think, again, we're back to that sort of conversation around the 80-20. 80% of our people are doing the right thing all of the time, you know, and there is a lower minority of people who, possibly not for the minutes, don't get me started on this one, who will go out of their way, you know, to walk their dog at certain hours of the day so they're not observed, and then you know, the classic is, and I still don't get this, you know, the ones who then pick after the dogs, put it in a bag and hang it in the tree. I don't understand it. So I think, unfortunately, Councillor Dunn, it's one of those areas where I don't think we can ever say we've that problem sorted. It's always going to be a problem for us.
I just don't know how we can sort of promote this any more than we have done, and yet people still don't seem to know about it. And we have a terrible problem with mess around the school.
Yeah.
You know,
it unfortunately, you know, we are dealing with a minority, and unfortunately, sometimes the actual the court system doesn't help us. So, you know, we've had scenarios where we've issued fixed penalty notices, and just to refresh members' memories on this one, if you issue a fixed penalty notice, the individual can dispose with that issue by payment of the fine. So you can't name and shame them because they've dealt with the issue. If they refuse to pay it, what you then have to do is you then prosecute them for the substantive offence of allowing your dog to foul. We have had scenarios where, having issued a fixed penalty notice, having it been challenged and taken to court, the court have found the individual guilty of the offence and actually issued a lesser offence than the original fixed penalty notice, issued a £40 fine or issued a conditional discharge. So whilst there is a power for the court to issue fines of up to £1,000, which could act as a deterrent, we don't often see that. And one of the reasons is the court will work on a sentencing guidelines. So it will look at a whole range of offences and say what's serious than that one, which is more serious than the next one. So giving a fine for a £1,000 dog fouling offence is probably going to be a rare exception, because they won't see it as a high priority as another offence of a different type. But I think it's just something we've just got to keep trying to work with the communities and trying to do the work we're doing. But I don't think we'll ever sort it, unfortunately.
No, I agree. I just had to point out that it's not as successful everywhere as what we think.
Okay, Councillor Horncastle.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to back up what Liz has said. I mean, if you look at the figures on the dog fouling thing charts, you know, you've got, 1,000 reports, just under 1,000 reports, 12 penalty notices. Now, I've read the report, listened to Phil's presentation, understand there's a shortfall of people working there, people have left, they've got the COVID situation, but maybe it's because it's the way you're actually trying to handle this. You're following up complaints. If you were to give me the power this minute to be an enforcement officer, I could go up the road to my nearest village, Allendale, and within half an hour, I could have somebody for not picking up after them. So maybe it's a time when enforcement officers, the ones you've got, actually should be a bit more proactive and actually come into the communities, whether the more urban areas or the rural villages, and just sit for half an hour, because you get them just like that.
I mean, what I would say is, you know, the issue of the issue of sort of dog fouling and issuing the fine is difficult, because the legislation requires you to actually witness the offence. That's what the legislation requires. But I mean, if we've got evidence to suggest that there is an ongoing and, you know, persistent problem in a given locality, we will deploy the resources. So, I mean, I'm more than happy, Councillor Horncastle, if you want to send me details through of when and where you believe this happens in Allendale, I will give a commitment now to the committee that I'll deploy resources there.
Well, in this day and age, you know, you pick up a lot of things through the local social media pages, and it's not just me in a rural area, it'd be far more in the built-up areas of the county, where it's one of the main issues. I mean, the dogs are fouling on pavements and on the village greens when the better weather comes and the kids are playing in it. It's not just disgusting, it's actually medically dangerous and very dangerous to farm animals. So all I'm suggesting, Phil, is I know you're doing your best, but perhaps a trip out into these areas for an enforcement officer, just sit for an hour And the word of mouth sharp spread will quickly spread. That's all I'm saying.
No, as I say, I'm more than happy. I mean, with the resources we've got, we can't be everywhere all of the time, so we have to be evidence-led. But if you want to drop me an email telling me, just giving a rough idea of, whether it's a certain time of the day, a certain location, I will give a commitment to deploy those resources, because, we do what we do because there is a risk to human health, from toxicorocanus in terms of what potentially children can find on the streets, what's referred to as pica, where they pick it up and they potentially eat it. That can lead to serious medical issues, including blindness. So there is a good reason why we try and tackle offenders who allow their dogs to foul. But there are challenges for us purely and simply because it is very much about dealing with the issue when it's observed. We have looked at whether or not we can take third-party evidence. That is possible. Where we found the challenges with third-party evidence is often neighbours or residents are reluctant to be the person who gives us the witness statement to then take a prosecution forward against another neighbour or another resident. I understand that, I get that, but often people say, well, I've seen this, but they won't give us that in a witness statement. But more than happy, to follow up if you want to drop me an email and get some resources out now and then have a look.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've got Brian next.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming on the back of Colin's remarks there. That's great that Colin's going to be looked after, but this is a Northumberland County-wide thing, and I appreciate that you're going to look at that as a special case. But we're looking at policy now of Northumberland County Council. I just want to come back to one or two things. You mentioned the SLA agreements around enforcement officers and the uptake of certain town and parish councils that will buy in extra time and extra resources to improve and enhance their areas.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is great, because I was one of the drivers for that, and I was one of the ones through the Ashton Town Council to promote that. But sadly, I went off screen there just to double check my facts. We've never heard of our enforcement officer since February of last year. He's still being paid. The money's still there, but we're not hearing anything. So I confirmed that with the clerk in the meeting. So that's something you need to look at. So if it's something, it's a great idea to enhance and move on, but if we haven't heard anything of them, COVID-19 just closed down in a lot of ways for us as well. So that's one point. The next point is, I think we need to review the way we do school visits. In respect of, everybody seems to be doing the kids are doing these online Zoom meetings and in a safe place, which is the proper thing to do. But maybe that's something that we as a council could pick up on to get the message around schools and educating them around littering. Because every councillor in here, the worst place for littering in their areas is always on a school route. And it's bottles, it's packets of crisps, it's energy, whatever. So that's maybe something to look at as a new policy. Further down your report, you've got something around a COVID-19 proof room for, it's on page 2, agenda 7. And it just, one has been fitted out to become available in October 20, an interview room. One was fitted out to become available, sorry, I'm regarding the safe communications with people. I just didn't know how that worked. Is that not something we should be spreading out? We shouldn't just have one room. We should have loads of room where we can draw people in and say, actually, you've done something wrong, and that shouldn't be an obstacle for us to enforce. Coming back to Councillor Liz Dunn's statement, I've got to totally agree with her on all the statements, but there's a name and shame. We don't need to do a name and shame. We could put a notice out in an area that if it is actually been a problem for dog fouling or littering, we could put it on a notice board and say, actually, 3 people have been fined here, or 3 people have been summoned, and let people know that they can't continuously do what they're doing. And that way, we're not naming and shaming, we're not going into people's private lives. One thing, just as a point of clarity, and you've got where you mentioned something about the fine of £660. Well, I wanted to check again on the costs. So it was £660 for the fine, £334 for costs. Then there's a victim surcharge of £66. What is that? And I'll come back if you can maybe just pick up on some of them points. Sorry for naming them all off at once.
Right. There's a couple of things in there, I think. In terms of, I think in terms of the offer to Councillor Horncastle, it's not so much a special offer. All I'm saying is, if we have the right evidence available to us, we will deploy resources. If there is a suggestion that there is an incident or issues in Allendale, that would be part of our core business to actually deploy resources there. The fact that it's out in Allendale is irrelevant to me. I'm just saying to Councillor Horncastle, if he shares that information with me, then we can look at that. But that's how we do all of our business. We try to be intelligence led to get the right places at the right time. In terms of the SLA, I will follow up on that because clearly there should be contact. I'd like to know personally why there hasn't been any contact. I think in terms of the schools, I mean, obviously, there's a question there probably to link in with Kath McAvoy's team as well about how do you feed that into the schools. I mean, as you rightly say, we're operating at different times of the schools. They're operating across, well, some are operating, I suppose, across IT, but many of our children are in schools. How you feed that into the curriculum, how you feed it into schools, honest answer is I don't know, so I think that's probably one to take up with Kath McAvoy Carr to see how that happens. In terms of you're absolutely right, in terms of the name and shame, we can't do that where there is a fixed penalty notice. Where we have a prosecution, we will always then we'll always do a press release on the prosecution thereafter. You're absolutely right, there is no reason why, as a general point of, if there is a general information board or town council, parish council notice board, why that information can't be publicised. I think the challenge we've got is, there is a finite amount of resource here for Northumberland. Probably what we're not going to see is the high volume we'd all want to see in terms of fixed penalty notices in each area to give us that deterrent, but it's definitely something we can look at and pursue.
Thank
I don't know if I missed anything.
Brian?
The surcharge, I mentioned something about the fine, £660, the costs £334, and a victim surcharge of £66. What's the £66? The victim surcharge? It seems as though it's 10% of the fine.
So the victim surcharge in that particular case will be a percentage of the fine. It'll be a recognition that the accumulation deposit had a negative impact on somebody, so a neighbour or something like that. That will be the victim surcharge. So in terms of the fine, there will be a maximum fine, and the court will determine what level of fine to apportion based upon the maximum. The fees will be what we determine as the costs we've incurred over and above our normal enforcement activity. But yes, the victim surcharge, I'm not sure it's always a percentage, but it tends to reflect the impact, alarm, harassment, whatever you want to call it, on the third party, which in this case I would assume will be the neighbour adjacent to where the actual accumulation of deposit was.
Chair, on the back of that, I think that it works out at 10% of the fine. And what I would suggest as an idea from this committee, that we actually lift that from 10 to 50% of the fine. So in this case, people, we don't want victims, we want people to come forward. And 66 quid for really something that would maybe shake somebody's world and life seems to be pretty pathetic to me.
Brian, it's not the victim surcharge isn't us. It's the magistrates. They decide. And I thought that was something that didn't go to individuals, went into a big pot, and people who would be attacked in the street who get compensation. That's where the compensation comes from. I may be wrong about that, but certainly it's not us that ask for that, Brian. It's the magistrates decide.
You see,
we've
coming
got
on
no control over that at all. All we can do is, if we can prove somebody's done it, take them to court and get the court to give them the maximum fine that they think is possible. I mean, we want £1,000 fine every time, but it is not going to happen, as Phil's explained, because of, you know, they had somebody in who attacked somebody in the street and they got a £300 fine. The next person is a dog fouler and he gets a £1,000 fine. That it's just, the court is not going to be allowed to do that. So all we can do is what Phil says, is get the evidence, take them to court and ask for the maximum. But it's up to the magistrates to decide what actually happens. If that's, you know, if I'm not right, Phil, speak up for goodness sake.
No, I think that is right, Jeff. And I think one of the things we have to be mindful of is that the court will work within that sliding scale, as it were. Often we as the local authority are using the same solicitors, and we're at Bedlington Magistrates Court a lot of the time. So if you like, there's an element in here whereby we've got to be realistic about what we can expect, because there will be circumstances when we'll be trying to seek a much higher penalty, whether it's a prosecution or whatever, from the court. And we can't have everything potentially at £1,000 fine, because we're actually probably then placing unreasonable requests on the court themselves about what they can and can't do. So we are very much dependent upon, you know, how the court views it or how the bench views it on that one particular day. But you're absolutely right, they will take a view on one type of offence vis-a-vis another. And a dog fouling offence, whilst a significant offence, will not be viewed as significant as something like an assault in the street or something like that.
Okay, even if it was a dog owner whose dog was fouling at the time being assaulted, I don't suppose that would end happily. Anyway, does anyone else have anything else?
Chair, can I just come back on one point?
Yeah, of course.
Have we, as a committee, we've requested that Phil comes and he's given a very clear and concise report. Have we requested that, or can we request an annual report with the views of the committee, just mainly for clarity and assurances on an annual cycle?
Well, I think Sean will tell us we can, I would imagine, but you know, we can say that now, but someone else sitting here in a few months' time might decide something else. We can't impose things from the grave, as it were.
Chair, the reason why I bring that up, you know, we've touched on a lot of things, you know, Colin now, Oldcastle's out in the sticks, and everybody's got concerns around this, and I think this is something that needs to be having an annual visit to.
Well, this sort of civil environment enforcement thing should always pop up here, but this is more for information than it is for us to say, you know, to take a strategic view and be saying to cabinet, well, we think more resources should be put into this, or, you know, we should be demanding the £1,000 fine every time.
No,
I'm sure I see people.
Yeah, that's just a wish, but it was the reason why to bring it annually is just for clarity and assurances.
Yeah, I'm quite happy for us to, and everybody else seems to be quite happy for that to be something. I'm just looking at Sean. Can we ask for this to be an annual thing? And if we were, when would it be more appropriate to be?
Well, yeah, I mean, I refer to the discussion we had earlier about the complaints report. Really, it's a case of, if the committee want to do that, then I would work with Phil to find out when the optimum time to bring it to the committee would be, because clearly it need to be a time in the year when you had a full year's worth of figures. So it's a case of if you agree on that in the first place, and then when I sit down to work out the work programme after the election, is where to put that into the timetable.
Yeah, well, if we're all happy with that, let's agree with that. Somebody's gone and I can't work out who it is. It's Eileen. No, she's still there. Anyway,
Brian?
right. So I don't think there's anything I can add to that. I think we're content. We've had our moan, and I think the main reason was just to have a moan about dog dirt. But most of us have got elected on the back of that for the last 20 years. So let's just carry on the way we're carrying on, and hopefully through education in the end, then people will realize that if you've got a dog, you've got responsibilities. Anyway, the last thing we have on the agenda is E, which is I can't find it. Do you just want to remind me what it is, Sean?
It's the work programme.
The work programme. And the reason we're just going to stop here for a moment before I close the meeting, realise we're at 2 hours. I do apologise. I'm usually sharper than this, as you know. But we've had a request from Philip to change the terms of reference of this scrutiny committee. He's presenting this to a constitutional working group next week, apparently. But he just thought it'd be better to explain to us why before, which I think is quite courteous of him. So I'm just going to bring Phil in. He's not going to spend too long. And I've got something to say after that, and then you can all have your say, and then we can all put the kettle on. Right, Philip, fire away.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. So I have a flu jab pending. I've just been reminded. So, in terms of my world and my breadth of responsibilities, I'm going to take you from dog fouling to counter-terrorism. So, within the current Communities in Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee, your terms of reference include community safety as a general area of scrutiny that you may wish to look at. I have been reviewing in association with Kath McAvoy-Carr and also Rick O'Farrell, who's on the call, our current approach to the management of what's referred to as contest. So for those who aren't familiar, contest is the name given to the UK counter-terrorism strategy. And we're actually looking to strengthen how we manage contest within Northumberland County Council by setting up a local contest board, which will sit across the executive team. And that in turn will feed into what's referred to as the Gold Contest Board, which is facilitated by Northumbria Police, which Rick O'Farrell actually attends. When we've been revising sort of current procedures, we've also been looking at the guidance. And within the guidance around contest and channel, which I'll come on to in a minute, it talks about it should be acknowledged and recognised within the constitution of the council. It doesn't actually then go on to demonstrate how you would do that or the means by doing that. So this is what we've been wrestling with about how to introduce this into the constitution. So contest, as I say, is the UK counter-terrorism strategy. It is divided into 4 Ps. So instead of having 4 Es, we'll have 4 Ps this time. The 4 Ps being pursue, protect, prepare and prevent. The prevent agenda is one that the County Council is heavily involved with, as it is with also around protect and prepare. But prevent is very much the strategy that looks at how you prevent individuals from being drawn into right-wing, any form of extremism or become radicalised. Part of the prevent programme is what's referred to as channel. And channel is very much the activity that we are responsible for in terms of working with individuals who are at risk of being radicalised in some way, shape or form, but haven't actually been criminalised. So they have not done anything which would be deemed to be a criminal activity, but they have been identified as a person of concern who may have expressed an interest in some form of extremism or radicalisation. And to deliver channel, we have a channel panel. But channel panel, if you think about it, is very much a safeguarding process. Again, working across agencies to try and ensure that the individual does not become radicalised and does not then become involved in criminal activity. So overall, it sits as a duty within the County Council. Overall, we are looking to strengthen the management across the executive team, and we are looking to develop some of this work across the Safer Northumberland Partnership, where a lot of the management responsibility sits for Prevent. And fundamentally, the ambition is to have it recognised that there is a role for the County Council within its constitution to deal with contest, prevent and channel, and there is a role for that activity to be scrutinised, and looking across all of the scrutiny committees, bearing in mind that as a community safety sits within communities in place, we believe the best place to amplify that community safety scrutiny function is for these terms of reference to be amended to include the reference to contest, prevent and channel.
Excellent. And I don't see that any of us would have any argument with that unless someone has got an idea that it should go to a different scrutiny. But as it's been explained, I don't see how it can. The only thing I would say, Philip, is that I didn't know what contest was until I read your report about the, with all the acronyms in. So I would make certain when you get to the constitutional working group that however you want the constitution rewritten, that it's actually made clear what contest is.
So just to clarify that one on Councillor Reid, so I think the work on behalf of the County Council has been led by a lady by the name of Caroline Elwood. So I'll feed this back into her because I actually don't attend that constitutional working group.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'll feed that back into Caroline. And I think after the constitutional working group, I think it then feeds back to exec and then through to council. But I will make that point known.
So are you, Brian?
Chair, totally agree with what Phil's just requested there. But do you think that maybe we should have a little bit training of something of the subject in itself for county councillors?
Yeah. So one of the ambitions is, and some councillors may remember this, about 5 years ago, I actually hosted a training session with a gentleman called, Chief Inspector Steve Baker from Northumbria Police Special Branch, and we did some training for members around Prevent. So one of the things we've set out is to actually revisit that training with members and for the executive director lead to take on that engagement role as well. So that will be picked up, Councillor Gallagher.
But I also, I think everybody's nodding with that, but also I would like to hope that we would be given some briefing or help or training in, particularly whoever is on this committee, of how to scrutinise it. If you see what I mean, because a lot of it is obviously, national security sensitive, one would imagine. So, if it's going to be given to us, then we need to be given the tools by which we can give it proper examination.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're all happy that we'll just pass on the comment about it being explained in the Constitution what contest is, then I think we're all happy with that. Yeah. Good. Okay, so the next thing is urgent business. I haven't been made aware of any, and Sean is thankfully shaking his head. So on that bombshell, I wish you all a very good evening, and I look forward to seeing you all at our special council next week, which will be lovely. I can't wait. And and all stay safe and well. Then I look forward to seeing you in your dining room soon. If I can work out how to leave. Do I have to stay, Sean, until everybody's gone, or can I just go?